My parents abandoned me at 4 months. Now they're suing me for my grandfather's 3.4 MILLIONAIRE estate. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot of my brownstone like a viper sliding under a door. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee going cold in my favorite mug, the chipped one Grandpa gave me when I turned 16, when I heard the metallic clatter. Something about the sound made my stomach tighten even before I walked over to pick it up. The return address was from Morrison and Cleary, attorneys at law. Heavy cream paper, embossed letterhead. Expensive. I tore it open, standing there in the hallway, still wearing my pajamas, and read the words that would crack open a wound I thought had scarred over decades ago. Notice of legal action. Claire Mitchell and Robert Mitchell versus Evelyn Grace Mitchell, contesting the last will and testament of Howard James Mitchell. Claim of undue influence. My parents were suing me. I had to read it 3 times before the words arranged themselves into meaning. Claire and Robert Mitchell, names I hadn't spoken aloud in 28 years, were challenging Grandpa's will. They wanted his estate. They wanted the $3.4 million he'd left to me, the granddaughter they'd abandoned in a hospital bassinet when I was 4 months old. I sat down hard on the floor, my back against the wall, the letter trembling in my hands. The coffee mug upstairs could wait. The morning could wait. Everything could wait while I processed this fresh betrayal from people who'd already betrayed me once, permanently, before I even had memories to record it. But I did have the story. Grandpa had made sure of that. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. I was raised by Howard Mitchell, a man who taught me that family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up. He'd been a patent attorney, sharp as a tack until the day he died at 89, just 6 months ago. He'd shown up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every softball game. He'd taught me to ride a bike, to balance a checkbook, to stand up straight and look people in the eye when I spoke. He'd also taught me the truth about my parents. I was 12 when he sat me down in his study, the one that smelled like leather and old books, and told me the whole story. Not the sanitized version he'd been giving me about them not being ready or having problems. The real story. Your mother was 23 when she had you, he said, his weathered hands folded on the desk between us. Your father was 25. They were adults, Evie. Old enough to make choices and old enough to live with them. He pulled out a folder then, one I'd never seen before. Inside were hospital records, police reports, and a single photograph of an infant, me, lying alone in a hospital bassinet with a note pinned to the blanket. I could still remember the words, written in my mother's looping handwriting, "We can't do this." Her grandfather's information is on the back. They left you there and disappeared, Grandpa continued, his voice steady but his eyes betraying an old, deep anger. The hospital called me at 2 in the morning. I was there by dawn. You were hungry and crying, and you'd been alone for 6 hours. Where did they go? I'd asked, my 12-year-old voice small. Everywhere but back. I hired investigators. Your father drained their bank account, including money I'd given them for your baby furniture. They drove to California, lived on the beach for a while, then went to Nevada, Arizona, Mexico. They sent me 1 postcard in 30 years. He showed it to me. A generic desert sunset with 5 words. We're okay. Don't look for us. Did you stop looking? I asked. Eventually. Because you needed me to be present, not obsessed. Because you deserved a grandfather who was there, not one chasing ghosts. He reached across the desk and took my hand. I'm telling you this now because you're old enough to understand. They made a choice, Evie. They chose themselves. And I chose you. I will always choose you. I cried that day, but not as much as you'd think. By 12, I'd already built my life around Grandpa. I had friends, good grades, a spot on the debate team. The absence of parents was just a fact, like having brown hair or being terrible at math. Knowing the details didn't change my daily reality, but it did change something inside me. It planted a seed of understanding. Some people don't deserve forgiveness just because they share your DNA. Now, standing in my hallway at 32, I felt that seed bloom into something harder and sharper. I called my lawyer, the one Grandpa had helped me find when I started my consulting business 5 years ago. Marcus Chen answered on the second ring. Evie, everything okay? I need you to look at something. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. My parents are suing me. There was a pause. Marcus knew my history. Everyone close to me did. I'll be at your place in an hour. He arrived in 45 minutes, his suit jacket thrown on over a t-shirt, clearly having rushed from home. I'd made fresh coffee by then and pulled myself together enough to change into actual clothes. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Grandpa and I had eaten breakfast together for 18 years, and went through the legal filing line by line. They're claiming undue influence, Marcus said, his finger tracing the relevant paragraph, arguing that Howard was elderly and you manipulated him into leaving you the estate. He was 89 but sharper than most people at 50. He updated his will 5 years ago when he was still playing tennis twice a week and beating me at chess. I know, and will prove that. Marcus looked up at me, his expression carefully neutral. But Evie, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. They're not just challenging the will. They're challenging you, your character, your relationship with your grandfather. They're going to paint you as a gold digger who isolated an old man from his real family. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. His real family? They abandoned their daughter and never contacted him again. He was my real family. I agree. But they're going to argue that Howard was angry at them, that you exploited that anger, that you poisoned his mind against his own son. Marcus hesitated. There's more. They're asking for full distribution of the estate split 3 ways. You, your mother, and your father. That would leave you with roughly $113 million instead of the full amount. Over my dead body. The words came out flat and cold, and I meant them. Marcus studied me for a moment. Okay, then we fight. But I need to know, is there anything they can use against you? Any emails, conversations, anything that could be twisted to support their claim? I thought about it. Really thought. No. Grandpa made his own decisions about everything. I never asked him for money, never suggested he cut them out. They cut themselves out 30 years ago. Then I remembered. Wait, there is something. But it helps us, not them. I went to my study. I'd converted Grandpa's old room after he died, couldn't bear to change it, and retrieved a locked box from the closet. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Grandpa wrote to them, I explained, spreading the copies across the table. Every year on my birthday, he sent them photos of me, updates on my life, invitations to be involved. He kept copies of everything. Every single letter came back returned to sender, or went unanswered. For 28 years, Marcus. He never gave up trying, and they never once responded. Marcus picked up one of the letters at random, dated to my 10th birthday. His eyes moved across the page, and I watched his jaw tighten. This is Evie, this is gold. This proves he never stopped trying to include them, that they chose estrangement. Not him. Not you. There's more. I pulled out another document, this one formal and notarized. 3 years ago, Grandpa had this written up. It's a statement explaining his decisions regarding his estate. His lawyer witnessed it, And there's a video recording at the lawyer's office. He explains everything. Why he left it all to me. Why he didn't include them. His sound state of mind. All of it. Why didn't you lead with this? Marcus was already pulling out his phone to make notes. Because I wanted you to believe me first. To believe in me. Without the proof. I met his eyes. I need to know my lawyer trusts me. I did trust you. I do trust you. He reached across and squeezed my hand briefly. But this proof is going to win us this case. They don't stand a chance. But even as he said it, I felt something twist in my chest. Winning the case would mean keeping the money, yes. But what I really wanted, what I needed, was something more. I wanted them to understand what they'd done. I wanted them to face the consequences of abandoning a 4-month-old baby and then having the audacity to claim her inheritance 30 years later. I wanted revenge. The next 3 months were brutal. Discovery was a nightmare of depositions and document requests. My parents' lawyers, and they'd hired expensive ones, which made me wonder where they'd gotten the money. Dug into every aspect of my relationship with Grandpa. They subpoenaed my bank records, looking for suspicious transfers. They interviewed my neighbors, my friends, even my ex-boyfriend from college, trying to find someone who'd say I was manipulative or money-hungry. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the worst part was seeing them again. The first deposition was scheduled at their lawyer's office in downtown Chicago. I arrived with Marcus, dressed in a conservative navy suit, my hair pulled back, looking every inch the successful consultant I'd worked hard to become. And then I saw them through the conference room glass. My mother looked older than I'd imagined, though I suppose everyone does after 28 years. She had my eyes, or I had hers, the same hazel green that changed with the light. Her hair was dyed an unnatural auburn, and she wore too much makeup, like she was trying to hide something. My father was balding, soft around the middle, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right. They looked ordinary. Disappointingly, devastatingly ordinary. When we entered the conference room, my mother's eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there. Guilt, maybe, or fear, before her expression hardened into something practiced and cold. My father wouldn't look at me at all. Ms. Mitchell, their lead attorney began, a woman named Patricia Halloway, with a helmet of gray hair and a voice like crushed glass. Can you describe the nature of your relationship with your grandfather? He raised me, I said simply. He was my parent, my family, my everything. And when did you first learn about the contents of his will? After he died. His lawyer read it to me a week after the funeral. You expect us to believe you had no knowledge of your grandfather's estate planning before his death? I looked directly at Patricia Halloway, then let my gaze drift to my mother. I didn't need to know. I didn't care about his money. I cared about him. My mother flinched. It was slight, just a small movement of her shoulders, but I caught it. Good. The deposition went on for hours, question after question designed to trap me, to make me seem calculating or cold. But I'd learned from the best. Grandpa had taught me to be patient, to think before speaking, to never let them see you sweat. When it was finally over as we were packing up to leave, my father spoke for the first time. Evie. His voice was rough, uncertain. Maybe we could talk? I turned to look at him fully. This man who'd helped create me and then disappeared. This man who is now trying to take from me the one thing my grandfather wanted me to have. No, I said. We couldn't. I walked out, and I didn't look back. But that night, alone in my apartment, I cried. Not for them, never for them, but for the little girl I'd been, the one who'd never gotten a chance to be angry about what happened because she'd been too busy being grateful for what she had. Grandpa had given me a beautiful life, but he couldn't give me back those first 4 months. couldn't erase the fundamental rejection that had started my story. Now they wanted to reject me again, to tell me I didn't deserve what my grandfather had chosen to give me. The anger that bloomed in my chest wasn't hot. It was ice cold and calculating. They wanted a fight? I'd give them one. I called Marcus the next morning. I want to file a counterclaim. Evie, we don't need to. We're going to win this case based on the evidence we have. I don't just want to win. I want them to lose everything. I took a breath. They abandoned me, Marcus. That's child abandonment. The statute of limitations might have passed for criminal charges, but civil claims have longer windows. I want to sue them for emotional damages, for the cost of my upbringing, for everything Grandpa spent raising me that they should have spent. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. There was a long silence on the other end. That's scorched earth, Evie. They brought this war to my doorstep. I'm just finishing it. Another pause. Give me 24 hours to research the legal precedents. If we can build a case, I'll file it. He called back in 18 hours. We can do it. And Evie? We should do it. The precedent is actually pretty strong for parental liability in abandonment cases, especially when there's documented harm. Your therapy records from your teens could support emotional damages. Grandpa's financial records could establish the cost of care. This could actually work. Then file it. The counterclaim hit their lawyers like a bomb. Suddenly, instead of attacking, they were defending. Patricia Holloway called Marcus personally, her voice tight with fury. This is a vindictive abuse of the legal system. No, Marcus replied calmly. This is a daughter holding her parents accountable for abandoning her. If they want to claim they have rights to their father's estate, they should be prepared to acknowledge their responsibilities as parents. The narrative in the courtroom shifted. Suddenly, we weren't the ones on trial. They were. The trial itself was scheduled for late spring, almost 6 months after that first letter. By then, the local media had picked up the story. Abandoned baby Sue's parents who want inheritance ran in the Chicago Tribune. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, some supportive, some cruel, all of them treating my pain like entertainment. I stopped reading them after a particularly vicious email suggested I was as selfish as my parents, that I should share the money with them because family is family. I wanted to write back and ask where that person thought my family was when I was lying alone in a hospital bassinet, but I didn't. Grandpa had taught me not to wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. The trial began on a Monday morning in May. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal, with uncomfortable benches for spectators. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia Holloway and her team. I sat with Marcus, wearing a gray suit Grandpa had bought me for my business school graduation. Judge Martha Reynolds presided, a black woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. I liked her immediately. The first week was their case. Patricia Holloway painted a picture of Howard Mitchell as a bitter, angry man who'd poisoned his relationship with his son and used me as a weapon against my parents. She brought in a psychiatrist who testified about parental alienation, about how grandparents sometimes manipulate grandchildren against their parents. It was fiction, but it was compelling fiction. Then came my mother's testimony. She took the stand wearing a pale blue dress and pearls, looking every inch the wronged party. Patricia led her through a sob story about postpartum depression, about feeling overwhelmed and scared, about making one terrible mistake that she'd regretted every day since. I wanted to come back, my mother said, her eyes welling with tears. But Howard made it clear we weren't welcome. He told us we'd abandoned our rights as parents, that Evie was his now. We were young and scared and broke. We didn't know how to fight him. I watched this performance with something like awe. She was good. Really good. If I hadn't seen those police reports, Those returned letters, that postcard from Mexico, I might have believed her. Marcus stood for cross-examination, and I watched him transform from my friendly lawyer into something sharper. Mrs. Mitchell, you testified that you wanted to come back. When was that? Within a few months. By the time Evie was a year old, I was desperate to see her. And yet you sent Mr. Howard Mitchell a postcard from Mexico when Evie was 18 months old saying, "Don't look for us." Can you explain that? My mother's face went pale. That was Robert. He wrote that. Your handwriting analysis disagrees. We had it examined. It's your handwriting, Mrs. Mitchell. Marcus pulled out the postcard, now mounted on foam board for the jury to see. And there's more. Between the time you left Evie at the hospital and this postcard, you withdrew $15,000 from your joint account, money your father-in-law had given you specifically for baby furniture and supplies. Where did that money go? I don't remember. It was so long ago. Your bank records show it was withdrawn in 3 cash transactions over 2 weeks and spent in Las Vegas. Does that refresh your memory? The jury was watching my mother with different eyes now. Mrs. Mitchell, in 28 years, did you ever attempt to contact your daughter? Howard wouldn't let us. Howard sent you letters every year on Evie's birthday. 28 letters, each one including photos, updates, and an open invitation to be involved in her life. Each one returned or ignored. Did Howard prevent you from reading those letters? From responding? My mother's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the truth start to unravel. When my father took the stand, he was even worse. He contradicted my mother's timeline, couldn't explain the missing money, and finally admitted under pressure that they'd been young and wanted to live a little before settling down. We thought Howard would take care of her for a year or two, and then we'd come back and be ready, he said, and I watched 3 jury members actually shake their heads in disgust. By the end of their case, the sympathetic narrative had collapsed. They weren't young parents who'd made a mistake. They were adults who'd chosen their own desires over their infant daughter, and were now trying to profit from the man who'd cleaned up their mess. Then it was our turn. Marcus built our case methodically. He showed Grandpa's letters, played excerpts from the video testimony explaining his estate decisions, brought in character witnesses who testified to my grandfather's sharp mind even in his final years. He showed my therapy records from my teens, the depression, the abandonment issues, the years of work it had taken to build a healthy sense of self-worth. And then he called me to the stand. I'd prepared for this. Marcus and I had practiced my testimony dozens of times, but sitting there, under oath, with my parents watching from 10 feet away, every answer felt like pulling glass from a wound. Ms. Mitchell, did you ever ask your grandfather to exclude your parents from his will? No, I didn't need to. They excluded themselves. Can you explain what you mean? My grandfather spent 28 years reaching out to them. He sent letters, photos, invitations to every important event in my life. They never responded. They made their choice. And it wasn't me. Grandpa's will just reflected the reality they created. How did your grandfather's decision to leave you his estate make you feel? I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. Grateful, but also sad, because I would have traded every penny to have him back. The money isn't why I loved him. He knew that. That's why he left it to me. Not as a reward, but as a tool to build the life he wanted me to have. And what about your parents' current lawsuit? How does that make you feel? This was the question we'd practiced most. Marcus wanted me measured, calm, but sitting there, looking at the 2 people who'd created me and then discarded me, I couldn't quite manage it. It makes me angry, I said honestly. They left me in a hospital when I was 4 months old. They took the money Grandpa gave them for my care and spent it on themselves. They ignored every attempt he made to include them in my life. And now, after 30 years of silence, after my grandfather, the man who actually raised me, is dead and can't defend his decisions, they show up with their hands out claiming they deserve a third of what he built and saved and chose to give me. It's not grief over losing him. It's greed over losing access to his money. And yes, that makes me angry. I saw my mother's face crumple, saw my father's head drop. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt tired. Patricia Halloway's cross-examination tried to paint me as bitter and vindictive, as someone who'd held a grudge and used it to manipulate an old man. But every question she asked just gave me more opportunity to tell the truth. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true you resented your parents? No. Resentment requires caring enough to be angry. Mostly, I just didn't think about them. I had a parent, my grandfather. I had a family, my grandfather. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA. And yet you're suing them now? Because they sued me first. Because they're trying to take what my grandfather wanted me to have. I'm not punishing them for leaving me. That's just part of my history. I'm holding them accountable for trying to profit from abandoning me. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Expert witnesses, character testimony, financial records, all of it building toward the inevitable conclusion. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. We stood when the judge entered the courtroom for the verdict. My hands were shaking, but I kept them folded calmly in front of me. Grandpa's voice in my head. Stand up straight, Evie. Let them see you're not afraid. The jury foreman was a middle-aged man in a cardigan who looked like somebody's nice dad. He read the verdict with a slight tremor in his voice, like he understood the weight of what he was saying. In the case of Mitchell vs. Mitchell, we find in favor of the defendant, Evelyn Grace Mitchell. The will of Howard James Mitchell shall stand as written. I felt Marcus's hand on my shoulder, steadying, supportive. But the foreman wasn't finished. Furthermore, regarding the counterclaim of Evelyn Grace Mitchell against Claire Mitchell and Robert Mitchell, we find in favor of the plaintiff. We award Evelyn Grace Mitchell $500,000 in damages for the cost of care and upbringing, plus an additional $250,000 in emotional damages. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My parents' faces went white. Patricia Halloway was already on her feet objecting, but the judge quieted her with a look. The jury has spoken, Judge Reynolds said. And frankly, I find their judgment fair and supported by the evidence. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you made choices 30 years ago that had consequences. You don't get to ignore those consequences for 3 decades and then claim parental rights when it becomes financially advantageous. This court supports the jury's decision. She banged her gavel, and it was over. I walked out of the courthouse into bright May sunshine, Marcus beside me, a crowd of reporters shouting questions I didn't answer. I had won. Completely, utterly, definitively won. So why did I feel hollow? That night, I sat in Grandpa's study, my study now, and pulled out the box of letters again. I read through them, all 28 years of hope and disappointment, and I finally understood something. Grandpa hadn't left me the money as a reward for being a good granddaughter. He'd left it as a shield. He'd known exactly what kind of people my parents were, had known they might show up after he was gone looking for an easy payday. The money, the detailed will, the video testimony, it had all been his way of protecting me one last time. I wish you were here, I whispered to the empty room. I wish you could tell me if I did the right thing. But I knew what he'd say. He'd say that sometimes standing up for yourself looks like revenge to people who expected you to lie down. He'd say that protecting what someone gave you out of love isn't greed. It's honor. He'd say I was stronger than I knew and that he was proud of me. I could almost hear his voice, gravelly and warm. You chose yourself, Evie. That's what I always wanted you to learn. The aftermath was strange. My parents filed an appeal, but their lawyers quit when they couldn't pay their bills. The appeal was dismissed. Eventually, through Marcus, they tried to settle. They'd drop everything if I'd forgive the $750,000 they owed me from the counterclaim. I said no, not because I needed the money. I didn't. But because they needed to understand that abandoning a child has consequences, that you can't unring that bell, can't show up 30 years later and pretend the first 30 years didn't happen. They declared bankruptcy 6 months later. I felt nothing. What I did feel was grief, finally. Real, deep grief for my grandfather, no longer mixed up with legal battles and courtroom drama. I sold the brownstone, too many memories, too much space for one person, and bought something smaller, brighter, near the lake. I started a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name for kids being raised by grandparents. I went to therapy and actually dealt with my abandonment issues instead of just pushing them down. And slowly, very slowly, the hollow feeling filled in. 2 years after the trial, I was at a coffee shop near my new place when I saw her. My mother, standing in line, older and tired looking, wearing a department store dress and cheap shoes. She saw me at the same moment, and I watched her freeze, watched her hand tighten on her purse. We stared at each other across the crowded cafe, two strangers bound by biology and broken by choice. She opened her mouth like she might speak, might finally say something, an apology, an excuse, anything, and I realized I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing she could say that would change anything. Nothing that would reach back 32 years and fix what was broken. I picked up my coffee, walked past her to the door, and stepped out into the autumn sunshine. I didn't look back. And for the first time in my life, that felt like freedom. On the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visited his grave with flowers, daisies, his favorite, and a letter I'd written but would never send. Dear Grandpa, you were right about everything. The money didn't matter. Standing up for myself did. Understanding that I deserved what you gave me, not just the inheritance, but the love, the time, the unwavering belief that I was enough. That was the real gift. They tried to take it from me, tried to make me doubt my worth by showing up with their hands out and their excuses ready. But you taught me better. You taught me that family is the people who show up, who stay, who choose you every single day. You chose me, Grandpa. Every day for 30 years, you chose me. And because of that, I learned to choose myself. I miss you. I'll always miss you. But I'm okay. More than okay. I'm free. I laid the daisies on his grave, touched the cool marble of his headstone, and walked back to my car with my head high and my heart, finally, at peace. The $3.4 million sat in careful investments, growing steadily, funding the scholarship program and my comfortable but not extravagant life. My parents' names never crossed my lips unless legally necessary. They became what they'd always been, footnotes in someone else's story. And I became the protagonist of my own, a woman who'd survived abandonment, fought for her inheritance, and learned that the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's building a life so full of love and purpose that they become irrelevant. That was Grandpa's final lesson, written into every dollar, every legal protection, every careful plan he'd made to ensure I'd be okay after he was gone. Not revenge, liberation. And in the end, that was so much better.